In this video, we are going to be attempting to fit a new soft top hood on this 1975 Mercedes 280 SL. In the last video, we took off the old hood, which had broken windows and a slit in it. And in the beginning of this video, we're going to try various solvents for getting rid of any old glue residue. So let's see what solvent works first on this up right here. What we'll do is you will use thinners. We'll paint it on with a brush and just let that soak in. And then hopefully this will come off nice and easily with a little Scotch pad. Took just a few minutes to clean that piece. We can put that back on the car. One of the advantages of filming is obviously you remember where the glue went, which was on this side and this side. This particular piece had a little piece of trim glued on it, so what we'll do is we'll just stick that back on with some Screwfix spray glue. Incidentally, whilst Trim Fit works fine for sticking small bits of fabric on, you cannot use a spray-on adhesive for actually gluing the roof to the frame. You're going to need to use some contact impact adhesive like Evo Stick. It didn't take too long to clean that trim piece up. These screws were pretty tight in there, and some of them are rusty as well, so we have ordered new screws from ACCU stainless steel screws. It's not something you'll ever see, but it'll just make the life a little bit easier for the next person who does this job. It is incredibly easy to drop one of these screws down one of these holes and lose it. So I'm just putting a big neodymium magnet on the screwdriver, but if you don't have a magnet, just pay extra attention, because once again it'll slow you down if you have to spend hours looking for one of these screws. You have got pieces of trim stuck on here. I imagine they're stuck on for a reason, so make a careful note of where they were stuck on. If you are using something like thinners to get the glue off, you need to be really careful that you don't end up getting it on the paintwork and dissolving your paintwork. So my advice would be to put a dust sheet over the car or something like that while you're doing it. The best way to get any residual roof and glue off those bows and off that metal bits of those roof is to use a sharp long blade like this and scrape off as much glue as you possibly can. Any residual glue will dissolve with thinners. You can get stuff like this from Carhood Warehouse. It's not expensive, and rather than pouring it in a dish, what I have used is just an empty one of these bottles. You can also go to a garden centre and just buy a plant sprayer, and then you can just put a little bit on and just go over the bit slowly but surely. What you'll find is this will clog up quite quickly with a kind of gluey mess as the solvent dissolves the glue, and you need to go over it while it's still wet with a cloth. It would be fair to say that this is no 5 minutes job. It takes a long time and it is messy. You may be tempted to try and use power tools, either a wire wheel on a drill or an approx wheel, but what you'll find is that that simply heats the glue up and burns it and doesn't actually get it off. You need a solvent to get it off. This front section here is painted, and if you start using thinners on there, you'll simply take all the paint off. So we've just been using one of these green pads here and slowly but surely just taking the glue off without hopefully taking too much of the underlying paint off. You can also use a bit of degreaser on here as well, and what you'll find is that that works well getting the glue off but doesn't take the paint off. The other advantage of using a bit of degreaser on there is that the pads don't end up as one sticky mess. The degreaser stops it getting sticky. Possibly the most difficult thing to clean, and also the most important, is this inside channel of the back bow here, because that will take all the tension of the roof, and my advice would be to do everything else first and then to come back and do this last. Have a cup of tea and regroup. It's the next day and I'm about to do something that I may regret forever, namely take off this bow here. It's held on by 4 bolts, but we're going to mark with marker pen and also with masking tape exactly the position of that bracket in there, because I can't see how we're going to be able to clean inside here with that in that position, we need to have it lying flat. So I'm going to mark the position of the hinges at the bottom with tape and possibly mark around these little bolts here as well with felt tip pen. Both lock washers on them there, and also these rectangular washers. Taking all those bolts out, let's see if this just slides off, and it does. We're just going to start off scraping most of the glue off with a sharp blade. If you're lucky, you can just cut large slices of it off, and then we'll go over with a toothbrush and some solvent. It took about an hour and a half to clean all of the inside of these channels, just using a mixture of razor blades, Scotch pad, some degreaser and some thinners. It's not a perfect job, but it's pretty close. The last bit of glue we've got to remove is on the inside here. Once again, we're just very carefully trying to cut the glue off without scratching that black metal paint, because every scratch will lead to rust, and then we'll just go over with a Scotch pad but without using thinners. I don't know if it's impossible to clean that without taking some of the paint off, but it's certainly very difficult, and if you were bothered about it, you would repaint this with a 2-pack paint. If you just put rust encapsulator on there, as soon as you put the glue on, the solvent in the glue would probably take the paint off and you wouldn't get a very good bond. So I'm not going to paint that with 2-pack. You can get small rattle cans with 2-pack paint, but I'm not going to bother painting that. Well, we finally finished getting all the glue off all of these bows, and what we're going to do now is replace each and every one of these screws with stainless steel screws, starting off with this here. We managed to get all the screws we need from ACCU. Now, I've mentioned this company many times before, I'm sure I'll mention them again. We ordered the screws on Friday afternoon and they arrived on Saturday morning using the ACCU Pro service, which is just wonderful if you're in the middle of a job, you've dropped the washer, dropped the screw, and you need something urgently. So here we go, let's get started. M4 10mm stainless steel screws. There's going to be 8 of them on these uprights. Now, if my wife was here, she would ask, what are you doing? And when I mentioned that I'm replacing these screws with stainless steel screws, despite the fact that you'll never actually see them because they'll be trim glued over the end of it, she would tell me just to put the original screws back in and stop messing around. But my own view is, if you're going to do a job, you might as well do it properly and make it easier for the next person that comes along. These screws that hold these uprights on here are M4 x 8mm Phillips Countersunk. These screws that hold the top straps in are number 4 2.9 x 9.5 posi self-tapping flanged button screws. Now these are often rusted. We're going to replace these with stainless steel before they get any worse. There's 12 of them, 6 on each side. The rest of these screws go on after we've put the roof on. Along the top here, you've got number 6, 3.5 x 9.52mm Phillips AB self-tapping countersunk screws. Here is the old roof here, and we're going to need to glue on these trim bits, these rubber trim bits, which I believe come with the new roof. And you can see that the cables here go underneath that trim bit, and the eye of the cable needs to line up with that hole there, because that is what screws into here. Just before we stick on the top bits of trim here, I'm just sort of test fitting this roof. Now the roof has a cut in the back of it here to allow you to get that peg in, so that's going to be the halfway mark of the roof, and then it has another cut just here, so I'm just putting a bit of tape on there to mark it, because I imagine what we're going to do is we're going to put glue on here first, stick the outside down, and then we're going to come back and actually stick this flap here on. If we try and do everything all in one go, I think it will be a disaster. The other thing we've got to be aware of is, as we're doing this, not to pull it one way, and that's why I've marked this, so that we know that we're kind of even on each side, and the roof does not quite go to the bottom of the post here. Same on the other side. I've marked where that slit is, but once again the fabric does not quite go to the bottom of the post. It's going to be fun doing this with contact adhesive because of course you get just one chance to get it right. You can already see these slight wrinkles in there. Going to be quite difficult to get out. On the Carhood Warehouse roof, you'll see this little hole here, and this channel here is the channel into which you need to thread the cable. Now, if you've got a brand new cable, it should be relatively easy because it'll be nice and straight. If you're trying to reuse your old cable with a million different kinks in it, it might be slightly trickier, and you might have to get a piece of wire or something down there, tie a piece of cord or glue a piece of cord, sellotape a piece of cord, and then pull it through that way. I just happen to have this piece of brake pipe there, and that hopefully is going to give a nice channel, make it super duper easy to thread this through like that. I'm going to glue these onto the new roof, but I'm just lining them up on the old roof, and I can see that these ones are actually shorter, so they're going to come not over that edge there, but actually just before it. You can see that this top edge here goes just about to the edge of the roof. We're going to be using this Evo Stick impact contact adhesive. You put it on both sides that you want to glue and leave it for about 20 minutes until it's touch dry, and then you put the two things together and it'll be an instant bond and fully cured in 24 hours. So we're going to do this first and then come back tomorrow and actually start doing the rest of the roof. I'm going to use a 25mm cheap and cheerful paintbrush for applying the adhesive. Crazy when you're applying this glue, you just need a thin coat. One thing that's worth mentioning if you are planning on using Evo Stick is it's quite hard to get that lid back on the tin once you've taken it off, and if you're doing what we're doing the job over several days, make sure you clamp the lid on, otherwise that glue would potentially go off. I've put the glue on here. I've got a piece of wood underneath there, so when we come to press the two things together we can press evenly. What I forgot to do is cut that serial label out before I started applying the glue, so just make sure you cut that label out first. You don't want to glue it underneath the rubber trim. It's been just over 15 minutes since we applied the glue. This is now just slightly tacky to touch and ready to go on the roof. Right, so here goes. This is a contact adhesive, so we basically are only going to get one chance to do this. I'm right, this bit here is going to line up to there, like so. I'm going to just stick this over the stitching. Try not to stretch this as you're rolling it down. I've got the wooden board or the wooden below me, so I can push down nice and firmly onto here as I'm gluing this. I'm going to lay this onto the car now, maybe onto the car bonnet, and just leave that overnight to dry. It's the next day and we're going to attempt what's probably the hardest part of this job, and that is gluing on this rear strip to this bow here. And in order to do so, you're going to need some clamps to hold back this material here. And the clamps that we're using all come from places like Poundland and The Range. These from Poundland, a set of 4 costs £1, and I think a set of 8 here costs about £2.50 from The Range. And they're slightly different sizes because you're going to need slightly longer ones here than you do at the front. Now, what won't work here is your standard clothes pegs. They're just not strong enough to hold the material. It is very easy when you're gluing this to pull it to one side and get everything unaligned. So what I've done is just got a little marker pen and lined on the metal and on the flap that we're pinning back exactly where the alignment is. And I'm going to do it section at a time. So I'm going to do this first section here, then I'm going to move on to the other side, and then I'm going to do the sides. So we've used all of our clips for this side here. We're going to put a thin layer of glue just on the front up to the halfway mark and along this piece of fabric here. And then we're going to attempt to stick that down, hopefully lining it up to these little lines here and on the fabric all the way along, so that we know we've got it exactly central. So one thin add an inch of glue all the way down to the bottom there, not on the inside, and then the same again on this inside channel. So now we've got to wait about 20 minutes, 15-20 minutes, it's quite a warm day here, until this is dry to touch. And then we have the trickiest part of all, which is to press that edge there onto that edge. You only get one chance to do it, and obviously if we touch it in the wrong place, it'll try and stick and we won't be able to separate it. So wish me luck. Yes, that is tricky, especially getting it around this corner here. We just peg this side back, put let glue on both sides. Once again, marked it all the way along, just so we can see that we're lining up as we stick it together. This is all stuck on now, not too many creases, hopefully. And now we're going to tuck this. We need to put a line of glue all the way along here and on the inside of this flap. We're going to use a little plastic trim tool. You could use a credit card or something like that, just to tuck that in all the way along there. We've let this glue here dry. Now we just got to try and tuck that underneath and use the trim tool to tuck it in good and proper, as they say. Once you've glued this rear section in, the next stage is to fit the lower weather seal. Now, when we took ours off, it unfortunately ripped, so we've purchased another one. This is from a company called Deutsch Parts, and it was about half the price of getting it from Mercedes. Let's just hope it's the right one. That certainly looks like the right profile. When it comes to seals, you can get these seals from Euro Parts, and they're substantially cheaper, but it is the case that the Mercedes seem to use a softer rubber. So if you can pick one of these up at a reasonable price, that's what I would suggest doing. This seal has a cutout here marking the center of the seal, and my advice would be to start at the center and work out towards the edges. It's quite tricky getting this seal in. The secret is to use a good trim tool, push firmly along the top. This rear weather seal is slightly longer than it needs to be, so we're just going to trim it a couple of millimeters from the end. Well, that was a physical workout getting that seal in there, but we got there in the end. Now that we've got the rear seal in, the next thing to do is to attach the cable to here via the top. Now, I can see that I have made a very small schoolboy error, because I think the this foam here goes underneath, so I'm going to have to just peel that back and then re-glue it over there, I think. As I'm not reusing the old groove, I can exactly figure out where the hole goes and make a hole in exactly the same spot. Finally got that screwed into there, just using a series of small screws, working up to bigger ones to make the hole. And obviously that screw is going through the metal cable, and all we need to do now is take this end of the cable and make sure we thread it through the correct holes and bolt it taut. So that cable runs along there, goes through that top hole there, and then it goes round there, clamped underneath the washer, back through this hole. We'll chop this cable, just leaving about an inch there, bend that at a right angle, and that'll be glued down. Cut that cable, now onto the other side. And then disaster strikes. That chrome screw snapped as I was putting it in, maybe because I crossed the threads, but now we're going to have to try and drill that out, which is a right nightmare. Well, we finally drilled out that snapped screw, but would you believe that both the screws, the chrome raised head screws from our parts car both snapped while we were trying to get them out, so we're going to have to order a stainless steel raised head 12mm M4. The two screws I didn't order was this one and that one because they were chrome. Now that we've got those chrome screws and cables in and tight, the next thing to do is to glue the front along the top here. Now on this particular roof, I don't know how well you can see that, but there is actually a white line, so we're going to be putting a line of glue this side of the white line about an inch all the way around, and we'll glue the top first. Now at this stage the roof is not under tension, but when you first fit one of these roofs it's going to be really tight to close it. We've got glue here and here. We just need to wait now for 15 minutes for this to be touch dry, and then we can glue the two together. You've got to be quite careful when you do this middle bit that you don't end up with creases. Ideally you want to start in the middle and work your way out. This roof fabric is quite a lot longer than it needs to be, and I noticed that I've this possibly is slightly too far over. That white line should ideally be on the edge. I hope that doesn't mean that this roof is going to be so tight that I can't close it. And we're probably going to have to trim some of this roof off because we're just going to glue it to the metal here. So we're going to do that next. Just put a bead of, not a bead, some glue along there, a thin bead of glue on the underside of that, glue the two together, and we'll probably put the front chrome trim on and then trim the roof to size after we've done that. Between gluing, I'm just putting the lid on each time and then clamping it shut because this does go off pretty quickly. Similarly, I'm just getting all the glue off the paintbrush with thinners. When you run it along a piece of tissue like that, all the glue will kind of come to the end of the brush. We haven't put any glue on these corner sections here. We're going to come back and glue those last when we put the front seal and frame on. Just marking the position of all of these holes, because obviously once you fold this over you're not going to be able to see the holes anymore. It'll be much easier to go in there with a pick and just locate those holes if we have marking tape. We're going to start from the middle and work our way out, just clamping as we go. Can you ever have enough clamps? Probably no. As I mentioned, these corner bits will come back and tuck those in and glue those separately. Now we're going to see if we can actually close this roof. We'll just latch it to the first latch. Now it's going to be super tight. I haven't latched this down properly at the front here yet because I do suspect it's going to be really tight fit. To say that roof is tight would be an understatement, so we're going to use two batteries, one in there, and two of the heaviest brake discs I've ever tried to lift from our SL55 and a couple of bricks. We're going to go for a cup of tea and see if we can get some stretch in this roof and come back and see if we can latch it. It's the next morning and we finally managed to get this roof to click down at the back, but boy was that tight. Ideally, if you do find that your roof is really difficult to click down, you want to go and park it in the sun or heat it up even with an air gun to try and get it to stretch a little bit. In the event, what we did was we just partially latched these, so these were just up a little bit. That gave us a few extra millimeters, and then we weighed the back down with multiple batteries and brake discs. So we got there in the end. The next thing we've got to do is glue these side bits down, and I don't know how well you can see this, but the degree to which you can get rid of the creases in the side there depends on how strong you are in terms of pulling and stretching this fabric here. You're going to have to trim a little bit of this fabric off, and what I've done is I've just marked the edges to here so that we, first of all, we know when we're pulling this how far we need to pull it. And secondly, we don't need to put glue on this bit here. Remember that these three holes have little screws in, and you'll make your life easier if you can avoid getting glue in those holes. You can just use a little magnet to pin that out the way so the two pieces don't stick together. Just while we're waiting for this glue to dry, we're just going to actually run all the screws through the threads here just to make sure they fit, because once that is stuck on, it'll be an awful lot harder. Right down at the bottom here, there is a screw, and we're going to just put that screw in now. It's a screw with a cut washer. There we go, that will keep that in place, and then we'll go and stick the other side. But we're now going to screw this on here, and just make sure you get the right holes. 3 of them are for screws, and the bigger ones are for the clips that hold on the rubber trim piece. Now, unfortunately, I was hoping to replace these screws with stainless steel, but unfortunately I bought one size too small, so we're just going to go and use the originals. Just be a little bit careful when you're putting these screws in. Do not snap the screws, and do not over tighten them and then strip the threads inside the aluminium. The screws went in without any problems. Now, if you find yourself with a small crease here, don't worry about that, because that will come out when the sun shines on your roof and all of this stretches. I'm going to finish this video here, not because I finished the roof, but because it's in danger of becoming the longest YouTube video on the channel. We still have a few things to do on this roof. I need to get myself a little scalpel and just trim this material here. Then we need to glue that seal in there and glue this seal in here there, remembering the 2 little clips that go in here and here. We've also got to just glue the corner pieces and reattach the chrome trim and the front seal. But this roof was so tight that I'm going to actually wait until the weekend when it's really sunny in England and park this car out in the sunshine with the roof up like this and allow it to stretch for several days before I even think of opening it again and doing these corner bits and the front. The last thing we're going to have to do on the roof is glue these sections here, which shouldn't be too difficult, and then finally pull this cable here taut, screw it down there, and then the last thing to do will be to glue that rear material around the boat. If nothing else, I hope this video demonstrates that it's perfectly possible to fit your own soft top if you've never done it before, and I hope the video gives you a few hints on how to do so. It is quite a job, and to be perfectly honest, for the sake of £250 or whatever a trimmer charges, I would be tempted to leave it to a professional.